Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our week 4 live session. This is Chris, obviously, and this week we're going to be taking a look in detail at the thesis statement. Now, the thesis statement is something that I think a lot of people tend to stress out over, and I think, in my experience, it's for a variety of reasons that ultimately can be kind of set aside once we focus on what the thesis statement really is. Because what it really is pretty simple. It's just a matter of getting there. So we're going to take a look at the thesis statement and how to draft your introduction, as that'll be our week 4 assignment. And we'll also discuss smart thinking tutoring a little bit, just to kind of give you a little bit of insight into how that works. So I think, the way to approach this course and the way to approach the essay that we're working on in this course is to kind of consider the essay a puzzle. And the reason for that, as I'm sure you've noticed, is that we're breaking up this essay into multiple assignments so that you can focus on individual components, as opposed to the entire essay all at once. So in week 2, you selected your topics, brainstormed a little bit, talked about how you might approach the argument, you might approach some of the research and some of the main ideas. This week, we're working on your introductory paragraph and your thesis statement. In week 6, we'll focus on the body of your paper as well as how to format your sources properly. Week 8, we'll talk about the conclusion. And then in weeks 10, 11, and 12, you'll actually put all those things together to actually have an essay draft. So, if you're working toward that over these weeks, that's fine. But you'll want to pay very close attention to the rubrics for each written assignment to make sure that you're fulfilling all the criteria that are required there. And this week, all we need to do is focus on the introduction and your thesis statement. Before we do that, I want to talk about smart thinking, because I've had a few questions about how that works, how that should be used, and what have you. So Smart Thinking is a tutoring service that's built into our course, so you have free use of Smart Thinking as much as you want. It's really valuable to have that because as we move through this course, as again you've already noticed, our discussions focus on different types of writing assignments and different sorts of mini essays, right? In addition to the research essay that we're working on. So having a tutoring service available to kind of review your work is really pretty valuable. Certainly, you're revising your work and your assignments based on my feedback each week, but if you can get extra feedback from an objective pair of eyes, that's pretty helpful. The important thing to remember about smart thinking, and this is where a lot of people get tripped up, is that you can submit anything you want to them. You don't have to submit a complete essay. I have students almost every term say, I have to wait until the end to use smart thinking, right? No, absolutely not. You can submit to smart thinking whenever you want. You can submit just a paragraph. You can submit just a thesis statement if you wanted. You can submit a discussion post, a piece of your essay maybe that's giving you trouble, and maybe you want some sort of specific clarification on it, whether it's grammar or mechanics or your research or whatever it is. You can submit whatever you want to Smart Thinking as often as you want, and all of what you submit will be reviewed, by a tutor and then returned to you within 48 hours of your submission. So that's the key part to remember here. Timing is pretty critical with regard to when you submit something to Smart Thinking. What you don't want to do is wait until late in the week that something is due, submit it to Smart Thinking, assuming that you're going to get it back in time to revise and get your assignment turned in on time. So you want to make sure that you are following those guidelines and that you're submitting it with enough time to get it back so that you can actually complete your work by our deadline. So in terms of accessing Smart Thinking, all you do is click on the tutoring link on the left side of the course page under our navigation bar, and that link will open up a page where you can then submit your work to Smart Thinking. One thing with this that you're going to want to be careful of, or just be aware of in terms of a technical issue, is to make sure that your internet browser is up to date. Had a number of students over the last few terms talk about how certain computers or whatever, it won't open up the Smart Thinking page, and it's almost always a result of the browser being out of date. So you want to make sure that you're using an up-to-date browser, ideally that you're using Firefox or Google Chrome, and you click on that link, and then when your browser is updated properly, you should see that Smart Thinking window open up for you. So when should you submit to Smart Thinking? Well, ideally, if you're submitting the same week as something is due, no later than Wednesday or Thursday, because that way, you'll have it back by Friday or Saturday. You've got some time, hopefully, to revise your work based on what they say and based on what I've said. And you want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to turn your work in by that Sunday deadline that we always have. That's not to say that you can't work ahead in terms of smart thinking. If you want to if you're starting to work on the body of your essay already or something like that, and you want to submit it to Smarthinking just to get a sense of where it is, feel free to do that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all, and it'll put you that much further ahead of the game. So if you are submitting the same week that something is due, be sure that you are allowing yourself enough time. But I urge you to take advantage of Smarthinking as a service. It's a really great service to have available to you for free. And I think, like I said, the extra objective perspective on your work, it's always helpful to see what other people think. So, moving on to puzzle piece number 3 here, the thesis statement. So, the thesis statement, again, like I said, is something that I think a lot of people get hung up on. And I think the reason for that is that for as long as we've been writing, most of us in high school and then forward, it's kind of pounded into our head that the thesis statement is if your thesis statement is bad, then the whole essay will fail. And that's mainly because the thesis statement is really designed to provide a summary of your entire essay. And to that end, it's certainly important. But it's not anything to be afraid of, and it's not anything to be worried about, because, again, you're the writer. You can revise your thesis statement as many times as you need to, right? As your essay evolves, so does your thesis statement. But basically, the goal of the thesis statement is to summarize your entire essay in one sentence. If you could summarize your essay, the whole part and parcel, in one sentence, what would that sentence be? And that's what you want to think about, right? Now, let's take a look at some examples so that you have some idea of what this should consist of. So, a good thesis serves 2 purposes in a persuasive essay. It sets up the argument in general, the general argument you have. So, let's say maybe one of the topics that we have is legalization of drugs or of marijuana. So, a good thesis should set up the argument so that the argument in general would be whether or not you believe marijuana should be legalized or not, right? That's your basic argument in that if you chose that topic. As well then as the specific points to be explored in your essay. And this is where I think a lot of people fall off. Because it's one thing to present the argument. It's another thing to then boil that down and include the individual points that you're going to explore in the essay in that thesis statement as well. So let's look at how to do that. So first off, let's look at the sample thesis. The purpose of this paper is to tell my audience that police body cams are a good idea. Well, there's nothing grammatically or mechanically wrong with that sentence, right? I mean, as a sentence, it's correct from a mechanical standpoint. It also indicates my stance on the issue, right? Police body cams are a good idea. But what doesn't it include? That's the better question here. It doesn't really indicate why police body cams are a good idea, or even why I'm presenting this topic, right? And those are both critical elements here if I'm going to get buy-in from my audience, right? The other thing that this includes is what? My personal opinion, which you are not to include in a research-based essay, right? In almost all academic and professional writing, your opinion should not be included. That means no my statements, no I statements. The purpose of this paper is to tell my audience, I believe that, in my opinion, in my paper. None of those statements should appear in your essay, right? You want to keep this completely objective and unbiased as you argue your main idea using research and evidence. So to that end, let's look at a better version of that thesis. Police body cams are highly effective because they increase safety for both law enforcement and the public, protect against false accusations, and can be used as a learning tool. Which of those 2 presents the ideas more clearly? The second one, obviously, right? Because it actually tells you what the paper's about, right? It doesn't just state my stance on the issue, which is police body cams are highly effective. Why? Because they increase safety for law enforcement, etc. So by presenting the main ideas I'm going to talk about in the essay in my thesis statement, I'm giving the reader a single statement that summarizes my entire paper, right? So that's what you want to work toward. Now, how do you work that into your introduction? Well, introducing your topic should stay fairly simple. One pitfall that people often find themselves a victim of is including too much background information in your introduction. Your introduction shouldn't include background information that would otherwise be in the body of your essay, right? What your introduction should do is establish the topic that you're presenting and establish the need for the argument that you're presenting. You want to provide whatever background information is necessary, but you don't want it to be the kind of thing where you're presenting so much that you're distracting the reader away from just establishing the argument, right? You want to avoid, obviously, personal viewpoints and things like that. But the goal of the introduction really is to contextualize your thesis statement. So if you can contextualize your thesis statement and your main ideas by providing basic background information into the topic or the argument and indicating why this is important, then you're almost all the way there, okay? So let's look at an example of this then. Using the sample topic here of police body cams and my thesis statement, my revised thesis statement from the other slides, right? So here's my draft intro. Clashes between law enforcement and the public in America have become increasingly complex over the last few decades. As technology advances, new methods of oversight are developed, and the most recent of those is the body cam, a device worn by officers on duty to record interactions with the public. With many disputes over the conduct of both police officers and civilians in the recent news, some new degree of governance is needed. Police body cams are highly effective devices because they increase safety for both law enforcement and the public, protect against false accusations, and can be used as a learning tool. So you see that there's my thesis, and everything that comes before my thesis in the intro as background indicates why this argument is needed, right? And, clashes have become more frequent. They become more complicated. There's a need for new governance. There's new technology involved, right? There are all these factors that have come into play that justify my argument, right? So the goal of providing that background information in the intro is not to provide you with detailed historical information or personal viewpoints on the topic. It's to contextualize the thesis statement. It's to provide context for your thesis and a reason and urgency for the argument, right? That 3-point method of establishing the specific points of argument in your thesis itself is called an essay map. So providing an essay map to the reader is really helpful because, again, it summarizes everything you're going to say in one sentence, right? Police body cams are highly effective devices. All right, let's stop there. Again, that's a complete sentence, right? Mechanically, grammatically, that's correct. Police body cams are highly effective devices. But it doesn't go so far as to tell the reader what my arguments are, right? Why are they highly effective devices? Because they, A, increase safety for law enforcement and the public, B, protect against false accusations, and C, can be used as a learning tool. All three of my main points of argument in my thesis statement with my argument, my broad stance on the issue, right? So again, this is not something I expect everyone to figure out overnight, and it's not something that has to be set in stone. Your thesis is going to evolve just as your essay evolves, right? So if you're revising your thesis up until the last minute, that's fine. It's perfectly reasonable to have drafts of your thesis just as you would have drafts of your essay because your thesis is part of your essay. I'll post a handout on essay maps to kind of give you a little bit of additional direction as you're moving forward with this, just to use as a reference. But this 3-point method is really effective, and I want you to kind of strive for doing this to set up your argument in this particular way. I think it'll prove very helpful. So far, we this week you'll be composing your thesis statement based on the topic that you selected in week 2. And you may need to do some research there. It may become necessary for you to do some initial research into the topic to determine what your points of argument are going to be, right? And maybe you've already started doing that. Hopefully you have. You want to draft your introduction then based upon the argument that you're setting forth and include the thesis, obviously. If you want to submit it to Smarthinking for practice just for this week to get a sense of the kind of response they'll give you, I think it's a great idea. It's not required in this week's assignment that you submit to Smarthinking, but I will tell you, and this is a crucial point, Smarthinking tutor feedback being included with your assignments will be a requirement starting in week 6. So if you do not have that transcript of your Smarthinking tutor's feedback included with your assignment starting in week 6, you will lose points. Okay, it's in the rubric. So again, be sure that you're very clearly reviewing those rubrics and ensuring that you're hitting every single thing in there so that you're not losing points unnecessarily. Okay, and then finally submit your week 4 assignment by Sunday at 11:59 as usual. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please let me know. I would raise one other point about Smarthinking and about my feedback, and that is that Smarthinking tutors do not communicate directly with me. So oftentimes when you get work back from them, they may have different comments or they may have additional comments that supplement the things that I'm citing in my feedback to you when I grade your assignments, because I'm grading to the rubric. They're not, right? They're working through what you've asked them to look at, but I'm grading specifically to the rubric. So if my feedback differs a little bit from what the Smarthinking tutors provide, don't be discouraged by that. Don't be worried by that. And if you have concerns because there's some sort of conflicting information, by all means, do let me know. Because you want to make sure that you're you're understanding what they're presenting to you as well as what I'm presenting to you for feedback. It's all just part of a big process of helping you learn to revise. So with that, I leave you to it, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with for your thesis statements or your arguments. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a great week.